So what I just wanted to cover was Azure Synapse Analytics, in particular, if time permitting, which may or may not be the case. I'll try to include a bit of Purview. So I'm a data and AI cloud solution architect at Microsoft, predominantly working in the financial services, but again, work across all industries as well. So I just wanted to give you an overview. I will try to break out of the slides and actually show you the interface. But first, I just wanted to give you maybe a baseline as to what Synapse is, because if I'm honest, it sometimes takes a bit of explaining or a bit of understanding, because it actually is many things in one. So let me just explain. So hopefully what you see here are basically the four pillars, and we're kind of think of it in the data world now, in the data realm, and we're an enterprise, we're ingesting data, multiple data sources, structured, unstructured. And we're trying to figure out, for example, how do we build our data platform? How do we build the pipeline structures around this? So these are pillars that you probably have seen in various maybe white papers, Gartner, etc. How we often try to portray the different steps in the life cycle of the data, from the raw ingest on the left-hand side there, right through to the curation, reporting, consumption, analytics, applications on the right-hand side. So just to sort of the way we often position it, and each of those pillars represent different disciplines, and behind those disciplines are often different services. So for example, some of these may or may not be familiar, some of these terms, but behind each of these pillars, so for example, starting from the left, ingest, we have lots of different tools, services, capabilities, both ours, Microsoft's, and partners as well. So we ingest data. Data Factory is mainly seen as a sort of, let's say, cloud native data ingestion, scheduling, orchestration, monitoring solution. So that's kind of the, let's say, default solution. The storing of the data, perhaps once upon a time it was blob, but we've sort of data lake is, if you like, has superseded blob, or is built on top of blob. But data lake store is often where we store the enterprise data, in a kind of, think of it as a folder structure. And there's obviously, we'd always recommend some best practices, because you don't want to store your data in one big bucket, so to speak, or container. But generally, that's how most customers would operate. And by the way, the data lake can be logical. You could actually have many physical servers behind that. And then we get into, say, prep and train. And what we mean by that is you may do some cleansing, you may do some data quality, you may do some transformations, joining, merges, all these classic ETL, ELT type techniques. And again, there are many, many engines, and certainly with the cloud, with Azure, you get many options, be they Spark, stored procedures, traditional SQL, Python, etc. I'm just going to put in, for example, Data Factory in there as well, because Data Factory also brings a, let's say, a low code mechanism to do transformation. It can also call, let's say, pro code, things like Spark, like Databricks, for example. It can also call those engines, but that's what you get. You get the flexibility, whether you're bringing SSIS packages, stored procedures, you want to embrace Spark or Python. Basically, you can bring all of that knowledge, investment to Azure, and using something like Data Factory, it can orchestrate all of those, let's say, hybrid pipelines. And on the right-hand side there, we have, let's say, the database engines, or let's say data stores. Again, we're going to focus on Synapse Analytics, but there are many. You're probably familiar with the SQL family, but we have things like Cosmos DB as well. And on the right-hand side, you would often serve what you've built, what you've created, transformed, to things like your BI solutions, obviously Power BI generally in our universe, but there are other consumption patterns, applications, AI, ML use cases as well. So the reason we kind of talk around these kind of pillars and the different solutions is it can lead to some confusion, or it can lead to quite a lot of integration effort to build this out, because you're knitting together different solutions, obviously trying to do it in a secure manner using things like managed identities, for example, for security best practices. So what Microsoft have tried to achieve is try to simplify this and make it one screen, one, if you like, one user experience that serves different personas, be you data scientist, data engineer, business analyst, DevOps. You could use the same solution. And basically that's where we get to Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics, or Azure Synapse Studio is the UI. And basically that houses lots of these different services, the ones I've highlighted there. They're all within the same screen, within one same experience. And as I said, the aim is to make that, let's say, the user experience, the provisioning, the managing, the security, orchestrations, to make that a lot easier. So you're not having to pass work between different teams or different divisions. You can, from a, let's say, separation of duties point of view, but it's not required from a technology point of view. So we're trying to make that a lot easier to basically get faster time to value, because the value is on the right hand side there, applying your data to AI, ML, analytics, making decisions, grinding the data through the pipelines from the left to the right. You want to accelerate that. And that's really what this experience is about. So the next thing I just want to get onto before I maybe break out into a demo mode is I just want to get across maybe some of the, let's say, some of the engines and some of the patterns here, because again, maybe how I positioned it previously, sometimes we need to get into the next level of detail. So just say, for example, we ingest data on the left-hand side, and again, we're using Data Factory. There are other solutions and services, but we'll default to that. Because what you're seeing here now is going to be what you get inside Synapse. So what you would then do is basically land the data in your data lake. And again, you can see all the various formats there. And again, it's typical in an enterprise to have lots of different file formats, be they structured, CSVs, text. A lot more are using things like Parquet, which are kind of very much synonymous with Spark. But what we can also see is a lot of customers will have a lot of data lakes or Azure blobs. They may have transactional systems like Cosmos or SQL databases. And what we're trying to do is ease the, let's say, consumption of that data. If that data needs to, for example, remain where it is, we want to make it easier to get access to it. So let's say the traditional model that we've had since 2016 with SQL DW, as was Azure SQL DW, which, by the way, is built upon SQL Server. Basically, what you did was you tended to take the data from your, let's say, staging layer, landing zone layer, as it was often called. You would do some transformations and put it inside a database, like, for example, SQL DW. Again, you can do that pattern. That's totally valid. Nothing wrong with that. There are some other patterns that you can actually use something called external tables, or those of you who know SQL, it's basically polybase. So what you can have is you can have a little, if you like, extension or stub that you're calling a flat file like a CSV, but actually it looks to a user or a SQL user like a table like any other. So that's using external tables, which is quite clever, and it just means that flat files can look like, or many flat files can just look like a standard table. So that is kind of the, let's say, paradigm of old. And again, nothing wrong with that. It still applies today, I should say. It's still, perfectly, let's say, legitimate. And again, I would say a huge percentage of analytics reporting, data processing still uses that pattern. But what Synapse adds is it adds these extra engines. So for example, you have a Spark on-demand engine. So again, what the Spark on-demand engine does, it basically is obviously built on Apache Spark. But what it can do is it brings all of the Python, Scala, all of the various, let's say, Spark languages. You can use those via notebooks inside the Synapse Studio here. But what you can do is with that Spark on-demand engine, you can basically analyze the data. You can process it, use things like Spark SQL. You can build machine learning models, basically exploit the power of the Spark-based languages. And again, that is an on-demand engine. So basically, it's, if you like, you can define how large, how to auto-scale. You can define how small, how large it can grow, etc. So again, it's more of an on-demand model as to the other model, which the one above it, the SQL DW. That is a provision model that you would provision an amount of compute, and basically you pay for what you provision. Whereas the models below are more on-demand type capabilities. So we also have a SQL on-demand engine. And again, the idea is that should you need to access the data on your storage level, and again, CSVs, Parquets, etc., the idea is that you don't have to ingest them. They don't have to go through a processing cycle. You can literally, and I'll show you, right-click, and then it can actually generate the code for you, and actually you can burst into the query. So that's quite powerful, that irrespective of where your data is, you can get access to it very quickly. And again, to do a lot of these things manually, for example, with Parquet files, it can be quite cumbersome to get to process them or try to build pipelines or build queries. we're trying to eliminate that hassle, which I'll show you shortly. And also what we believe is very powerful is that we have Power BI built into the experience as well. So again, Power BI, kind of the, let's say, industry leader for business insight, business intelligence, and baked into the experience you get a Power BI screen, which you can link to your workspace. So again, you get the entire life cycle of the data here, from ingestion on the left-hand side, right through to visualizing it. And also you can use the Azure ML workspace, which think of Azure ML workspace and think of it as enterprise ML operations. So it can help you not just do machine learning scenarios, but doing things like deploying it. So for example, you build a model in your Spark on-demand engine, and that what you can do is you can link it to your ML workspace, and then that can deploy it into a container, into a Kubernetes cluster or Azure container instance as well. So again, it tries to abstract the pain of having to do that manually in Kubernetes, which is non-trivial. But again, it's just tried to, in a series of clicks and through automation, that can happen automatically. So that's all within the one screen. I've got 9 minutes to try to break out of this and show you some of the some of the interface. So I just wanted to get across some of the, let's say, the capabilities and engines there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop presenting for a second, and I'll share my screen again, and actually we'll get into the Synapse Studio. Any questions while I'm toggling between screens here?
There's no comments so far, but I wouldn't worry about stopping dead on the hour, on 5:30 the hour.
Oh, but it's Mr. Collins. I don't want to steal his thunder, his sentinel thunder. All right, let me just find my. I think it should be. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have. So this is a Synapse Studio, the UI. Obviously, you can see it's via the portal. I just want to get across a couple of points here. I'm going to be able to do in the time I have is just show you the interface and some of the capabilities, not as much as I'd love to drill into it. One thing that's pretty cool, by the way, there's literally 6 on the left-hand side, 6, if you like, blades or panels here. I'm just going to walk you through maybe not all of them, but some of them. The Learn one is quite cool because what you can do, by the way, is click into the gallery. And what you get access to within literally 2 clicks is going to bring up a gallery. These are all public data sets, obviously lots of COVID. But what you can do is you can just click on one of those. If I go to continue here, what it does in a series of, and that's giving me a preview, but what I could do is I could just click the add dataset button and it adds it into my workspace and I have access to it straight away. And this is real data, by the way. It's just publicly available in Azure, so you can literally pull it into your workspace. So again, it's quite rich. To get up and running, it takes seconds because you have all of these data sets. We got lots of notebooks, we got lots of SQL pipelines, etc. You're up and running in seconds. And again, that's kind of quite a powerful, I think, capability here. So let me just come out of that. So what I'm going to do is maybe just quickly show you the manage screen. I'm just on the left-hand side. The reason I just want to show you this is very familiar to anyone who knows Azure Data Factory. I won't make that assumption that everyone does. But what you can do is you can basically define links to all the other Azure services. Actually, not just Azure services, but because this is Data Factory, which has got 90 connectors, you can connect outside of Azure as well. So we've lots of on-premise, other clouds, online services connectors as well. But what you can see in here, I've got, for example, a Power BI workspace connection, a Cosmos DB connection. The idea is that you would define the universe of your data, which, as I said, could be potentially all of your enterprise data could be defined in here, which means you have access. Obviously, the access is governed and controlled and security rules apply. But from a technology point of view, you can access that data. Little shout out to Git configuration. So everything you've seen in here is also hooked up to GitHub. So the next thing I just wanted to get across was, so while I'm in the kind of management screen here, you'll see on the left-hand side, we have these various pools. So we have, and again, this, if you cast your mind back to that slide, so we have the concept of SQL pools, and again, you can have one or many. And by the way, I think the reason you may have many is you may have different teams with different, let's say, use cases or concurrency requirements, SLAs. They could have different pools, if you like. You can also scale up and scale down. These pools can be different sizes. We also have the Apache Spark pools. And again, and these are, think of these as just pure engines. These are compute engines because the storage sits in the data lakes and the data sources. It just gives you that capability should you need to sort of service users. That's really what these pools are about. But you have control to decide how big or how small these clusters grow, these compute engines are. So that's the kind of and you probably see purviews in there as well. What I'll do now is just go to the data sort of panel on the left-hand side. So in the data panel here, you'll see we have the concept of my workspaces. So again, the workspace is databases as databases as we know and love. So this is my provisioned, let's say SQL type SQL DW of old, but it's what we call a dedicated provisioned database. So you can see there's tables, and by the way, this looks no different to probably what you're used to in tools like Management Studio. So basically what you have is you have your series of tables, and one second here while my screen's refreshing. Basically what we have is we have tables, and yeah, I just wanted to point out we have the concept of external tables as well. And as I mentioned before, these external tables, these are actually pointing to files. Even though it looks like if I do a select here, it looks like looks no different to a SQL table. It's actually a file under the covers. So again, it just means that gives you the option to, for example, SQL users can query flat files, even though they don't need to understand what the format is. It just gives them the power. And by the way, you've seen there, it's no similar to SSMS. It's generated the code for me. It's generated the SQL. So the reason that's important is when we get into, if I just switch into the linked data sources, and again, to tie you back here on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is these are some of my data environments, blobs, Cosmos, data lake. But this could be your entire, this could be hundreds of services, right? That you know, it just means that you have the potential to access all of the data in your enterprise. So what I wanted to show here is what you're looking at here. This is actually a data lake. So it's just think of it as a folder structure with, you know, possibly potentially petabytes of data. I'm just going to go into a particular folder here. And in this folder, what you'll see is there are multiple files of different file formats. So you can see I've got a JSON, I got a CSV. And this is really one of the key, I think, values of using Synapse. So what I can do is I can right click on any of those files. I could do something like select SQL script, and I can just, it basically can automatically generate the code for me. And again, this is quite powerful because to do that, you can see the code is generated behind the scenes. It's quite, let's say, verbose. It'd be quite a task to do that manually. But that's what you get with the beauty of getting, and it's just return the results there. Irrespective of your file formats, all of the major things like CSV, JSONs, Parquets, all of those different file formats, you can just need to right click and it'll, as I said, generate the code for you. The other thing that's quite valuable as well is if I right click on these Parquet files, let me just tick a for them. If I right click, I can go to new notebook and you can see it says load to data frame. So what that is doing is behind the scenes, it's now building some Spark code for me. And again, these are 4 files, but imagine if you've hundreds, and imagine if you've folders and subfolders, and this can all again be done using clicks or using things like wildcards to make it a lot easier. I'm actually going to select a Spark pool. So you may have noticed up on the right-hand side here, I have the concept here of a drop down for my language. So, and you can see I've now switched, whereas before everything was SQL. I have the option to run different engines, PySpark, Spark Scala, .NET, Spark SQL. And basically I select I've only one Spark engine here that's going to run against, and I'm going to hit the run all. So by the way, those of you who are familiar with Spark, there may be a bit of a penalty here because I may not have primed my cluster. But basically, it will run, and basically it'll run that code for me. But again, the key is that this is auto-generated. That rather than doing this manually, just by virtue of having Synapse, it's auto-generating that code, and you can see it's starting up with a Spark session. And again, it's going to generate that data frame. And once you build a data frame, you can again do all sorts of analytics, ML, Spark SQL, whatever. Again, whatever your requirement is. So that's a really quick, I think, run through of while that Spark is running, while that is taking place. I just wanted to also point you to another concept by Cosmos. So you may or may not be familiar with Cosmos. It is one of our cloud enterprise data stores. But what it also is often used for, it's often used as a transactional data store. So what we have in here, we have something called Cosmos DB Link, where what you can do is through Synapse, and think of Synapse as an analytical engine. It can actually query the transactional engine that is Cosmos without having impact on the transactional engine, which means you can get very near to real-time analysis from your transactional environment from here within Cosmos. So there's a bit of, let's say there's a bit of integration going on behind the scenes between Synapse and Cosmos. But again, that's quite, it's quite, I think, a powerful capability that you're able to run analytics alongside your transactional environment. So again, just conscious I'm running out of time here. The only other thing a couple of things I just wanted to highlight was in the develop screen here on the left-hand side. I'm just going to go down to, you've probably seen, by the way, this is where you can keep all of your SQL scripts, but you'll also see here I've got Power BI. So again, just to show you that within the same experience, you can have your Power BI reports. You actually link your Power BI, you link to your Power BI workspace. So all of the Power BI assets you have, reports, etc., data sets, you can access them from here. So here you can see I've accessed my Power BI workspace, and it's the New York taxi driver data set. Again, that's all, I think it adds to the experience, because what you can do is you can build, as I said, build pipelines, you can do analytics, you can do ETL, ELT, and again, you can actually see the end product, if you like, through Power BI. And again, just on the left-hand side, this is actually, the pipeline icon is actually Data Factory. Again, if you're familiar with Data Factory, this is where you do your integration, build your pipelines. Again, there's some simple ones there. These are just doing copy type scenarios. But again, this is the whole Data Factory capability built within Synapse. That those of you who know it, it's the same Data Factory. It's just, as I said, you get access within the one experience. So that's a really quick run through, and I'm really not even going to get to Purview. Other than I just want to say this what you're seeing here is Azure Purview, as it Purview preview. Ignore the Babylon statement. But basically what we have now is we do have a data catalog within Azure. It is public preview, and it is called Azure Purview. But basically what we have is the capability to, let me just do a search here, to store all of your enterprise assets that we've scanned. We have scanners, we have classifiers. You do have to point it to those environments, and basically it lands within your catalog, as you can see here, and you have the ability to do, you can see on the left-hand side, we filters, but we facets as well. We've classifiers, we've sensitivity labels, we've glossaries, we also have lineage. So again, I'm going to time out trying to even get close to talking about Purview, but again, maybe it's something we do at another date. And this, for example, is just a view of, this is a table, a SQL table. I'm just going to show you the schema, and there you can see it's fired certain classifiers. It's detected things like people's names, emails. There's over 100 classifiers out of the box, things like email, first name, last name, etc. But also you can customize those. So you can, if you have a certain vernacular in your organization or certain patterns, then you can train and define your classifiers to identify those. And we also capture things like lineage. So there you can see the evolution, if you like, of the various fields in that particular table. So only 3 minutes over. I haven't cut too much into my esteemed colleague. Any questions before I hand over? By the way, I'm covering like 2 or 3 careers in one, so I just apologize for the brevity. But again, at another date we can get into more detail, because we're getting into, there's many topics there within one. No, job done.